This gets back to the culture issue, where Starfleet's just a military and jumpers filled with yut-yuts who have enough collective brain power to run a tiny light bulb long enough for the science fair potato to step out for a piss. And that's been a thing since Deep Space Nine's Chrysalis. It's been a very stupid thing since Deep Space Nine's Chrysalis. My premise is not that Star Trek Picard isn't Star Trek. It's that Star Trek has generally failed to uphold its own ideals, and you should not expect that from Star Trek anymore. There's nothing culturally enriching or intellectually challenging about this shit. Any show can slap a broken Aesop onto a story, or even, to name a random example, have a character give a speech about principles apropos of nothing and then claim it's espousing those principles when it's absolutely not. It's saying them, and then it's believing and acting on completely separate principles. This is Morning Perfect Base. I'm Van Velding. I'm going to do Minecraft thing. I'm kind of off my rhythm. I'm still in the Banana Viking server. I'm not building anything. I am going back to the Bastion to get my stuff. Which I think might include my diamond armor. Well, we're going to have to see. So, I didn't bring any blocks. Generally, I should bring some wooden blocks. There should be some wooden blocks at the Bastion. But whatever scaling I have to do on my way over there, in the midst of my Minecraft rampage, is I'm going to have to do it with pumpkins. And I know in the previous episode I was talking about my lack of approval for cobblestone being used in the Nether to build things, even though it's very good as a path marker. Well, I'm about to do something very unaesthetic, and that is just use straight up pumpkins to get around the Nether with. So, am I a hypocrite? I guess I could have gone back to my home base and gotten some wood or some Nether blocks or something, but I didn't. This is going to be my last little bit on Picard for a while. I'll talk about the ethos of the series, and then pivot to general modern complaints about Star Trek for a bit. Picard itself is a series about nothing. It's a facile repudiation of TNG as a sheltered, privileged series, and it's not nearly as grounded in reality as its hastily constructed plot points about robot slaves, incompetent death squads, omnicompetent intelligence agencies from failed states, democratic states ruling with malice and negligence on behalf of an invisible constituency, Romulan fucking prophecies, or false flag terrorist attacks might make you think. I had to cut out so much from the first few drafts of these 4 episodes that I still wasn't able to talk about the incompetent death squads or the literal goddamn Romulan prophecies. It is a series that's all about reality, except it's not. It's all about thinking that today is darker than yesterday, and accepting that, and believing that. It's because things must inevitably be this dark. And yeah, humans tend towards greed, towards violence, towards the malicious belief that if we take care of us and our own first, that everything else will either be fine or they'll deserve their own suffering. I heard about that from a little series called Star Trek. But humanity can overcome that. There's no great truth in the idea that giving in to force, the use of power for personal gain at the expense of others, in any of its forms, extortion, violence, manipulation, rape, there's not some great truth in the idea that using force is great. Force gets us what we want. It does. If you kill a man, that man is dead. Trust me. And it's hollow. No one debates that if you're strong enough, you can murder motherfuckers until you are sitting naked and bloodstained on the world's tallest ash heap. If you don't want to sit on an ash heap, if you want anything more than bones and blood and soot, there is only one way to get it. It's not naivete, it's not idealism, it's not strength or privilege. It is that when 2 people work together and share the benefits of that work equitably, they prosper more than 2 people working alone. I'm going to crank up the view distance here to see if I can just see the Bastion. But no, I can't. It's exactly the same. It looks exactly the same. It's that cooperation scales without limit. It is that every obstacle to that is an invention of the human mind. Every one. Fear, hate, judgment, envy, entitlement, injustice, indolence, hedonism, willing ignorance, greed, power. the knowledge that there is a better way, that's the treatment for what ails us, and it has to be constantly self-administered. While only a fool would deny the power of force, the right way, the solution to our pain, our frustration, the wrongs of the universe is reason. Reason which appreciates force and even uses it, absent both personal petty motivation and dispassionate rote obligation. Star Trek is generally based on the notion that people, aliens included, no matter how mired in these obstacles to cooperation, are reasonable, that people are reasonable. They can change their minds. We can change our minds. You are allowed to change your mind. I allow you. I have spent almost 12 years watching and enjoying Marvel films that, even though they... Oh, okay. All right, timed out. I guess that was a heck of a time to time out. I'm going to try to log back in and try to drop a pumpkin to mitigate the effects of the fall. Nope, didn't. Okay. They bend and they reach and they contrive to make unreasonable villains so that they can justify one action set piece after another. They're sometimes tiring to watch, and taken all together, they're exhausting. But people are reasonable, actually, and reason and understanding can solve problems. There are thousands, maybe millions of stories that have irrational people as a problem and violence as a solution. You can hear those stories every time someone says people are stupid, or common sense isn't common, or when they casually offer that the world would be better off without some of this type of people, or that forcing them to behave is the only way to deal with those people. Violence as a solution isn't new. It's been our go-to tool for literally millennia. It's not some radical new answer to our question. Try new and improved formula violence, now with lead and slick, visually appealing action sequences. The radical, bold, good, realistic idea. The one trick that despots and extremists hate is acknowledging that people are reasonable and we should listen to them and speak to them. If there's one idea that should be in Star Trek, it's that one. Yeah, Picard's not interested in that, though. Not even slightly. It might pretend later in the series that it is, but if it does twist around and believe it's somehow support that, it's taken me and everyone else who shares my view as fools, because it says its story was actually about hope, and it's wrong when it does that. Star Trek Picard is not about one story, though. I mean, it is. It's 10, QED. If you wrote 6 stories with no overriding ideals or principles, and then 4 more with ideals and principles, then you haven't told one complex story. Right, there we go. Gotcha. All according to Keikaku. Then you've told 10 stories with unclear themes. Each story is its own story, actually. And the values in it are the values in it. Tautological, but I'm sharing this on the internet. So it's as tautological as it is utterly ignored by the people who need to hear it. That is one chest. I died. Had to place 2 chests, maybe. Did I go too far? Is there are there separate Bastion segments? That is good to know. Also, I just don't think Picard's that clever. I've heard people defending Picard saying that Star Trek was always written with the Federation intended to be flawed, and also that the Federation became ossified and hidebound, and that's why it sucks more in the TNG era. I'd say that eventually the people creating the Federation wrote more flaws into it. Yes, it was not intended to be flawed, and saying that both the Federation was always flawed and that it got worse in some measurable way is contradictory. The greatest thing is that while you can't argue for both of those positions, you can't argue against both of those. Picard repeatedly violated there we go. This is the place with my stuff. Let's block it off. Boop. Done. Got it. Stopped. Okay. Starfleet knew that, and they allowed Picard to continue to serve as captain of their flagship, just like they allowed Kirk to continue serving as captain. And his Federation wasn't any more or less hidebound. I can't think of any interpretation of Picard's constant exonerations than you were allowed to break the rules when that is what was needed, which is exactly how folks see Kirk's rule breaking. And even Kirk's rule breaking wasn't a part of his character until Wrath of Khan, where it was retconned in, and Search for Spock, where he breaks the rules And then, what does he do? Oh, yeah, he immediately submits himself for punishment in the voyage home because he's not a rogue. The notion that the Federation's moral downfall was related to engaging in politics, I've seen. Like, Kirk's era was gauged in a proxy Cold War. I don't know how you describe that apolitically. How can you be like, oh, Picard's times, they just, they engaged in politics, and that's why they were so bad. Look, two nation states driven into conflict by their coexistence, vying for influence over lesser nations, killing intelligence agents, and pointing industrially produced weapons of mass destruction at one another while using fabricated ideologies to garner public support. And that's not political? That's not political, you're telling me. All nations set policies and enact them. All have a way to make decisions about the allocation of resources. You call the process by which a nation determines its collective intention Schmiegelschmorp. You can do that. But Schmiegelschmorp will just be politics with a funnier name. It's the same thing as the military thing. I love that Starfleet had the ideal of not being a military. But it is a military in the same way Schmiegelschmorp is politics. Kirk defines himself as a soldier in... really should have brought an axe. Errand of Mercy. Picard says that Starfleet is not a military, but they're also the instrument of force sent to face off with the Romulans in Season 1. Twice. In Season 4's The Wounded, we learned that the de facto force engaging in a war with Cardassia was Starfleet. In Season 6, Starfleet personnel are engaging in incursions into Cardassian space based on faulty intelligence. They're doing it badly, but those are clearly military operations, some performed with the proverbial military intelligence. Look, there's nothing inherently dirty about politics or politicians, and it's impossible to organize people without them. While the Federation we see is increasingly written as socially complacent, riddled with the corrupt de facto military, unconcerned with how the policies they want affect others, none of those things can be attributed to the broad existence of politics. What the people who say those things might mean is contemporary politics, which reflect a complacent society with corrupt loci of powers and a lack of concern with the way in which policies which benefit us affect those around us, but I wouldn't give the people saying that any credit for answer by induction. The Federation was started as a vaguely defined culture that surpassed the self-imposed faults of our modern era. It wasn't even long before it was written such that it placed its political interest above principle. In A Taste of Armageddon, it was willing to sacrifice lives for the greater good, the Galileo 7. It even had, debatably, evil admirals, court-martial, for the same reason. Up to a point, let's call it Era 1, the flaws that were written in were done implicitly. There weren't any episodes of TOS or TNG where we talk about massive institutional problems in the Federation. Well, except Conspiracy, where literal bugs drilling into people's necks were making institutional problems in the Federation. We disagree with the decisions of those above us, but that's part of living in a society. There are a lot of shitty decisions from Starfleet and the Federation. About 4 Badmirals, Jellicoe is a dick, and Admiral Nechaea might be more polite if she'd ever save herself the time sending an email with a mission packet before telling Picard that she doesn't have time for common fucking courtesy. Please, there you go, Nechaea. It's a really short word. But Kirk, Picard, and Cruz roll with the punches and treat those things as isolated incidents instead of massive structural problems. It rolls back around to is the Enterprise an aberration issue? Does every Federation starship have to deal with moral quandaries, deadly anomalies, and Badmirals about 26 times a year? Think carefully about this. If Badmirals are indicative of larger structural issues, then time loops are something that every Starfleet vessel deals with every other year for about 70 years. I'll get back to that, but the heroes of the original series and the Next Generation are possessed of strong moral principles and a compulsion to act on them. And yet, there is no social or political urge on their part to address these issues. Even at their worst, they act out against specific shortcomings, but never grapple with systemic flaws. Even in Insurrection, the extent of their rebellion involves telling the Federation Council, hey, the Baku are hot actually, do we want to reconsider? As you may have guessed, I'm working up to a larger argument that I've seen made. One that states that writing flaws into the Federation is deep, actually. It lets the series explore those flaws without the paternalist, colonialist tone of exploring those flaws in other, less developed civilizations. What I've just described is not a series that's exploring these ideas or trying to overcome them. It's a series that's chipping away at what makes it special to artificially raise the stakes by making the government we identify with the bad guys. Era 2. When Deep Space Nine and Voyager revisit the aberration issue, they say the Federation is as corrupt as any contemporary government and Starfleet is weird, respectively. At which point, we break a seal of the apocalypse because I am about to give Deep Space Nine way more shit than Voyager. DS9 doesn't really explore or overcome any of the Federation's corruption. Deep Space Nine shrugs its shoulders, says, what are you going to do? What are you, a highfalutin saint in paradise? Let's do some war crimes, lol. This makes occasional flaws in the Federation into an explicit characteristic of it. Those flaws are portrayed as virtue at times, but they're never criticized or addressed. Our not heroes anymore, protagonists, continue to fight the specific manifestations of those flaws, but never summon Star Trek's ability to distill systemic and moral principles into a message for the audience. Less damning, DS9 makes it clear that the Federation is deeply systemically flawed, and has been, yet none of our complacent hypocrites farting around in front of a camera every week have done more than just punch the symptoms of it. Let's pause to watch the entirety of Journey's End, wherein Jean-Luc Picard is just down to relocate natives who are descended from the pre-Western natives of the North American continent, calling them Indians the whole damn time, no less. So the Federation has become more flawed because it was an easy way to give emotional impact to stories about corruption and provide more conflict for our protagonist. It has not ever done more than grimace at the specific actors of those flaws or throw out some hollow angst over having been complicit with it. In Era 3, we see a Federation which is not morally defensible and whose citizens just don't care. The pretense of a better society is gone. In Picard, I unironically celebrated Kestra being able to hunt dangerous animals, but I don't forget that in Season 1 of TNG, killing animals to make a meat was revolting to the Enterprise crew. There was a serious debate on set about the morality of denying freedom to Livingston, Picard's fish. The flaws in the Federation are worth having if we are going to make them actually important. Flaws in the Federation are worth having if we are going to ask hard questions about the people electing the people who are giving orders to our main characters. If we study the dynamics of corruption, if we grapple with systemic issues instead of assuming without comment that the Federation populace is a complacent mass who just let people do awful things in their name. DS9 did these things with Bajor and Cardassia, and that treatment is one of the reasons Deep Space Nine is a great show. As a show made by Americans, placing America in place of the Federation largely, it's bizarre that their best criticisms of the polity they're trying to criticize aren't even directed at the Federation. Picard isn't interested in doing that as a series, just showing characters that we're supposed to sympathize with do things we aren't supposed to think about to people we're supposed to believe are mean. And at the end, there's the expectation that we've learned some unrelated moral lesson. In that it expands on Star Trek's progression of creative flaws, I'm supposed to accept that's okay, that that's just going to be how it's going to go? I don't. Why would I? Why would I just accept that? If you like the principles upon which Star Trek was based, if you like the parts of Star Trek that inspired you to be better, or to do better, or to believe that things could be better, then Star Trek isn't for you. I'm not saying it's bad. Clearly, I'm saying that. But it's not the point I'm making, right this minute. I'm saying that while certainly there are people who like it, and I think it's good, and I'm happy for those people, it doesn't have to be you. What I'm saying is that this is not a battle you can win if you want to fight this out. We're not organized. We're not focused. A lot of the people who seem to be on this side seem to be misogynists. They're people I don't really want to organize with. I mean, what even are our demands, and what could we get other than a fourth promise that the next season of CBS All Access Trek will be the real thing before we get exactly what this team is inclined and capable of giving us, which is exactly what the last 3 seasons have been. You can't get blood from a stone. We don't even have knives. We don't even have the stone. We have the stone's Twitter profile, and we're shouting at it, and that doesn't make blood come out of it. You can't force someone to make good television. You can organize. I think it's too late for that personally, but let me know. I mean, if you're going to organize in the year of our Lord 2020, organize to support Joe Biden and get people to the polls. Organize for that. But what you can do is you can share other shows. The Orville is fun and has some promise. The Good Place is the most remarkable television I've seen since Avatar: The Last Airbender. Maybe even the best television I've ever seen. So share what's good. And if that fails, then I would say that you should do the most Star Trek thing of all. Instead of all those folks expressing their fandom by buying Star Trek stuff or consuming the latest Star Trek thing or buying the "I'm waiting for the Federation to form" bumper stickers like they're waiting for their Hogwarts letter, let me quote Neil Gaiman while telling you what every hero from Star Trek, good Star Trek, would do. What Gene Roddenberry and the people around him did. Make good art. So until next time, keep asking questions, keep making good art, and never stop learning.